I'm Mike Leonard. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs at ASA. Um, I will talk for a little bit and then quickly turn it over to our real experts here, Ron Sorini with Sorini, Samet Associates, who, according to his Zoom, is Megan Costello, maybe on his best days. But Ron is
Oh
the one that looks
wow.
like
Okay, I
Ron.
am. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
And then the real Megan Costello is the one that looks like a Megan. And Megan's the VP of Trade and Customs Policy at SSA, both of whom and others at that firm have been extremely helpful to us over the last, I don't know, half year or so since we begun working together in helping us navigate the wild world of tariffs. So really the purpose of this is we've had a couple of major updates over the last week or so between a important court case that is still pending, but has potential for altering at least the manner in which tariffs are implemented in the future, as well as an announcement earlier this week dealing with the steel and aluminum tariffs increasing to 50%, as well as a lot of policy changes underneath that. As we mentioned just a minute ago, we will do Q&A once we run through a quick presentation at the beginning. Your screen, Zoom screen, probably looks something like what you're seeing on the screen here. So when we get to Q&A, just given the number of people we have on here, if you can keep your microphone muted until then, and then if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box, get to that. That's one of the orange circles I have highlighted on the bottom of the screen. Or you can do the raise hand function, and I'll call on you. You can unmute and ask your question. Feel free to type chats in throughout the discussion. We'll either get to them as they come up if it's relevant to what we're talking about at that time, or we'll get to them at the end. But in terms of asking a question verbally, we'll wait till the end for that. I'll give my best shot at giving a quick update of high level of what's happened, as I mentioned earlier, in the last, we're really going back several months, but especially focused on what's happened over the last week or so with, there's been a lot happening with tariffs, most of which has some sort of impact one way or the other on our industry. Some of which doesn't, whether it's focused specifically on automotives or other industries that are not specific to recreational fishing, but a lot of the broad general tariffs that affect just about the entire rest of the world, as well as some specific components, obviously, is going to affect our industry, just given how diverse of an industry we have in terms of where products are coming from, what products are being made, what components they have in them. The big ones in kind of broad categories, as you can see on the screen here, on the left side is IEEPA, the international emergency powers that the president has to some extent, and that's part of what we'll get to in a little bit of whether or not the president has complied with the authority given to him in declaring the current state of affairs an emergency that warrants the actions he's been taking. But we've had a bit of a yo-yo effect on here with IEEPA tariffs. Folks will remember originally a lot of countries' Pacific rates were announced on Liberation Day, shortly after reduced to a 10% across the board rate on just about everyone except for the handful of countries listed here for another month or so. After that, who knows, back to the higher rates, like mostly higher rates, country specific, or negotiations are being made in real time as we are hearing with many of these countries to try and reach a trade deal that will, in some way or another, alter what the ultimate reciprocal rate might look like. And again, with the backdrop of that meaning that there's a court case that we'll discuss here in a minute. China is in a bit of a different category. It does have the 10% reciprocal rate, but also the 20% rate that was put in place earlier due to fentanyl and illegal border crossings for a total of 30% on top of pre-existing tariffs duties under the first Trump administration and product specific. That's at least down from the 145% that was put forward for a short period of time. And varying news reports on the state of which those two countries are talking, negotiating, potentially the president making a trip to China in the near future, but we can talk more about that. And then Canada and Mexico are also in a bit of a separate category as well, having 25% tariffs put in place again due to fentanyl and illegal border crossings on that rate on all non-USMCA qualifying goods. On a separate category, again, specific to our industry, less so on steel, but mostly on aluminum. There have been increases in the tariff rate on steel and aluminum materials as well as derivatives, which for us, there's a big, long list of all the different products that are subject to the derivative action. But for our industry, specific HTS codes that are of particular note relate to fishing reels, reel accessories, and landing nets. As of Wednesday of this week, that rate was increased from previously 25% now to 50%, as well as a bit of a double whammy there, where another change made on that June 4th announcement was the non-steel or aluminum content in those product derivatives are now subject to the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs, the stuff you see on the left. That was one sort of silver lining in the pre-steel and aluminum tariffs at 25% was if your product was subject to those steel or aluminum tariffs, you were the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs did not apply to your products. That's no longer going to be the case. One sliver of good news in all this is de minimis has been the subject of many of these actions. It has been ended for China as of May 2nd, meaning all those products valued under $800 must pay tariffs, taxes, duties, unlike had been happening for 10 plus years, where those products were able to come in. One person importing one product under $800 per day were not subject to those duties. So creating a competitive disadvantage for those that were having to pay those as more and more sales coming in, especially through online sales. The rest of the world, unless Megan or Ron correct me, I don't think the Secretary of Commerce has determined yet that adequate systems are in place, but that is still hanging out there. That if and when the Secretary of Commerce determines that Customs is capable of handling de minimis for all the other products coming in from the rest of the world, that they too will be ineligible for de minimis, and this is also something that Congress is talking about and potentially will take action on at some point to statutorily tweak the de minimis rule. Mentioned that there's a court case that has been getting a lot of media attention and potentially throwing a wrench in the president's plan. On May 28th, the Court of International Trade ruled that the administration exceeded its IEEPA authority. Again, the stuff you saw on the left side, this doesn't affect the steel and aluminum tariffs or some of the other actions that have been taken. But when those unbound tariffs with vast economic and political significance were implemented, the crux being that the president largely based those IEEPA tariffs on trade deficits that have been getting worse, but had been in existence for a really long time, and something that has been slowly building over many years and decades. Probably doesn't fit the category of an emergency, and therefore, president did not have the authority to implement under that IEEPA authority. Of course, that didn't stop it for very long. The federal government has appealed the decision. It's currently in the Court of Appeals, likely have a decision on that in the not too distant future. Maybe Megan and Ron have some insights there on timing. But the tariffs are still in effect because a temporary stay was issued by the federal court while the appeal is ongoing. Again, jumping back to de minimis, this decision does not include any sort of assessment or impact on the determination of de minimis entry for Chinese origin goods. There were some news reports indicating otherwise, but from what we understand, de minimis has not changed as a result of this court case. There's a separate court case challenging that, but that no decision's been made on that. Ultimately, most experts feel like this is all headed to the Supreme Court to make the final decision on whether or not the president has this authority, and anyone's best guess on how that plays out. And then another point that Megan and Ron might talk more about is, should all this play out to where the court does throw out the president's authority to have issued these tariffs in a way that's retroactive. Companies have already been paying these, so what will the process look like for refunds? It's hard for me to wrap my head around that, but that will be something we need to consider as
Actually, Mike, it's not even the process. It's whether or not everybody would be eligible for the refunds as
gotcha.
opposed to just the plaintiff. So that's the bigger
Oh, gotcha.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good point. So that's the crux of what I'm going to cover. So with that, I will stop. Let me first check. We've got a few questions. I don't know, Megan, Ron, you can see these. First one I can handle easily. Yes, Doug, I'll send out the presentation to everyone that registered. Um, and Megan, you talked about how they have not released the annex lists yet to clarify, and that's an important distinction, which HTS codes do have the 50% aluminum steel on them. So with that, I think that's my last slide, stop and turn it over to Ron and Megan to pick things up and share any additional insights or clarification that they want to provide.
Great. So the fake Megan Costello, I turned off my uh, video, Mike, because I had a couple pauses during while you were talking, saying I had unstable internet. So I apologize. So I figured it'll be better if I keep my video off, and everyone will be better off without not seeing me. So let me jump into a few points and then turn it over to the real Megan Costello.
Ron, I
So a
just
couple
changed your
things.
name
First,
to Ron Sorini, just so we don't have to be
oh
confused
wow,
about
I
that
see
anymore.
that now.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm good. I get to be myself.
Dude,
Um, So let me start with Section 232 because that's the steel and aluminum tariffs that Mike talked about. That was done under Section 232 national security um, authority that the president has. We this week met with, and again, this is probably unrelated to most of you, but we this week met with the person conducting the investigation on wood products and derivative products at the Commerce Department. The reason I mention that is there are a number of 232 investigations ongoing. We can send a full list out just to make sure, there's copper, there's um, autos and auto parts, et cetera, but there's just pharmaceuticals. You never know. Some people might have products with computer chips in them. So there's a lot of investigations. The reason I mention this is the Wood Products investigation was initiated on March 10th, and Commerce had 270 days, has 270 days to initiate the investigation, but they said they're sending their recommendation to the president in the next 2 weeks. And so, therefore, it's pretty clear that they're under instructions to expedite those investigations. So, again, I just encourage you all to take a look at, we'll send out a list of all the 232 investigations. And if there are any issues there, we should then meet with the Commerce Department because we found the meeting we had extremely useful on wood and wood products. So, shifting back to, well, on de minimis, let me take that real quick. I mean, Megan's the real expert on de minimis, but the reason I think the president will probably not use any additional authority to curtail de minimis on other countries is because in his big, beautiful bill, they use the revenue of ending de minimis on July 1st, 2027, as an offset to some of the tax benefits they're providing. And if the president uses his authority that then becomes indefinite, they may lose the ability to use that revenue to offset things in the tax bill. And you all know that's like, it's a crazy process. Reconciliation is never easy. Um, Elon Musk has said a few unkind words about it. We don't know if that's going to have an impact on the Senate. I suspect it won't. In the end of the day, Democrats will just have a lot of fun with that. So I did want to mention that on de minimis. With regard to status of negotiations, um, we have been in direct touch with some of some of the countries have reached out to us. We've reached out to others. It doesn't appear that most are letting the court case, the CIT ruling, affect their negotiations with the U.S. Although I do suspect it's emboldened the Chinese to probably play a little bit of a hardball. But we still think that most of the major countries outside of China are very close to a deal. In fact, we met with Chairman Jason Smith of the Ways and Means Committee this week. He said that there are 12 deals already concluded that the White House does not want to announce yet. They will before July 10th. We know of a couple. We know El Salvador, um, Dominican Republic, and the Philippines have deals that we think are good deals. And we're hopeful, and I expect that products that are eligible for free trade agreements. So I know some of you have apparel lines and use CAFTA DR. We expect that any qualifying goods under CAFTA DR would go to zero, not stay at the 10%. everyone other than Nicaragua. Nicaragua is going to get hammered. There's no question. There's deep concern about Ortega and the Nicaragua government. So from everything we can tell, Glenn was at the a meeting with Senator Daines a couple of weeks ago. He had mentioned that he'd been in touch with the premier in Vietnam, talked to the president, believes the Vietnamese have put on the table a phenomenal deal that he encourages the White House to accept soon. They may have already, we don't know yet. They're committing to buy, it was either 26 or 28 Boeing aircraft and a bunch of U.S. agriculture products and LNG, et cetera. The big issue that the U.S. has put on the table with Vietnam and particularly Southeast Asian countries is the belief of the administration that goods coming in under country of origin Vietnam or Indonesia are actually made in China and being illegally diverted through those countries. And so, therefore, the White House is asking for mechanisms to deal with that. And Vietnam's already started a process to do verifications of country of origin. So, again, we think that's pretty positive. So, I'd say of the big countries, India looks like they're in good shape, a deal soon. Vietnam, some of the smaller countries we're a little uncertain right now. We aren't sure about Cambodia. A lot of people have asked about Cambodia. We know we've talked to them, both their government and private sector. We think that's in a good place, but I have not heard that from the administration. Until you hear it from the administration, you don't want to. So I don't want to be too optimistic on that. I don't want to be pessimistic either. But I know that it's a small country, but it still has a pretty large trade deficit. They're working hard to try to get a deal. Um, so I think with that, Megan, what did I miss, or what else should we cover?
I think both of you covered everything and we can all just hang up now. Just kidding.
Good.
The only thing I would add is at the current time is a little bit of color behind the CIT case. I would not recommend for you all to put any stake in that leading to the tariffs being permanently removed and getting refunds. I say that because as I interrupted Mike earlier, there's a very large question of whether or not all importers would be subject to or be the recipient of refunds if we get to that point. And the other thing is that the president and many of his members of the administration have also not just signaled, but they have already publicly stated that if IEPA is found to be, or that they, exceeded their authority by the other courts, that they're just going to use other methods to provide tariffs. And there's multiple other laws that they could use. They're a little bit more difficult. Some of them require Congress. But regardless, I just would not I wouldn't put any of your pricing or any of your decisions based off of a potential awesome outcome there. Even though I know like the news that night made it seem like all the tariffs were going to be gone, which was a little disingenuous, but that's the news for you. Does
Let me
anyone?
make an excerpt.
Okay,
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask if
Understand.
anyone had questions about it.
Yeah, I wanted to add one other thing I should have mentioned on China. So you recall you've got the series of tariffs, the IEPA tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs. Um, we have heard directly from a very high level person at USTR, as well as folks on the Hill, that the administration is extremely pleased with what China has offered to curtail fentanyl trade, and the anticipation is from at least folks on the Hill that 20 those the IEPA the not IEPA the
They
fentanyl
are.
tariffs could be gone soon. Yeah, they're also done
Yep,
under
they're
IEPA.
IEPA.
So
Yep.
we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. That could happen reasonably soon. The rest of it is going to be subject to the negotiations with China. And as I said, the Chinese are going to play hardball for sure.
But back to the CIT case, if for some reason we get to the point where it does look like all importers will be included and that a decision would be in importers' favors, then we're going to have another webinar to talk about some administrative procedural stuff that you'll need to do to prepare yourselves for refunds, but that is way far down the road. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that in case that does happen. What else can I go into? So one thing for the 232s that we didn't go into, and Jeremy, you asked about that. It asked about was the orders referenced in yet to be released annex, just like they did last time. I personally believe, and based off of my conversations with other folks, is that the annexes are actually the documents that customs released as an attachment to their guidance. The reason why I say that is those are the same. Well, let me back up. There are some, they didn't update them very well, but that's the same list as it was before. And so no changes. And the reason why I say that is there is a active inclusion process where domestic producers can request to add more things on the 232 list, and a comment period to rebut those requests just ended on Wednesday. So I think, now again, this is logical thinking, and sometimes the administration is not exactly operating with logic, but I would assume that that is going to be the process that you add products to the 232 list, not this supposed annex. I think the annexes were just referenced because that's what the original EOs referenced. And of course, the administration just wanted to create havoc for us and confusion and ask more questions. But so is there any chance that the annex? No. So the major change from the 232s from previous is, if you recall, and you probably all know this, is when your fishing reels were originally subject to the 232s, they were then not subject to the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs, which was a blessing because then you got to avoid the 10% or the 145% for that one day. Now what they've done is that the non-metal content is going to be subject to those IEEPA tariffs. One thing to be said about that is if you guys have been doing this, and I haven't spoken to you guys to see how it's going on trying to break out the values between the metal content and the non-metal content. I'm assuming it's pretty difficult. If you still are not breaking those values out, then customs has not released guidance on if the whole product is going to be subject to both the 50% and a reciprocal. I think what we should know, in the next week or so about that, but we'll see what happens on there. And the other big change is, so for any of you that are brands that also have other products, like a camping cooking stove or something to that extent that is classified in Chapter 73 or 76, those products now have to be broken out by their value as well. So now you guys have a 3 month, I guess, advanced help on that to from an administrative perspective, because all of those folks are scrambling to break out those values. Is there any questions on the technical breakouts of all that, or how it's stacking, or?
Jake, so you got a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So I saw on that first slide about because my products come out of China with the fentanyl tax and the reciprocal. Is the IEEPA also on top of that, or does the reciprocal take place of the IEEPA? So is it
on top of it?
So it's a total of 40. So yeah.
It would be a total of 30. So you have the 20 and then the 10. The 20 is the fentanyl and border crossing, which is the one that Ron was talking about. Most likely will be removed soon. And then you have the 10 reciprocal as well.
Plus any 301 tariff, right?
Yeah.
And the normal tariff.
And the normal MFN duty and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it maybe the terminology is getting confused because both of those actions were done under IEEPA, but then oftentimes people refer to the reciprocal tariffs as the IEEPA tariffs. But again, that same authority was used for the fentanyl border crossing So the 20%, 10% were both done under IEPA, which gets you to the 30.
Which
Okay.
is a good point. So those are the tariffs that if by chance the CIT case resolves in importers' favors, both of those sets of actions would be deemed inadmissible and, illegal essentially, and would be stopped.
And then just to further on that point, what Ron was saying earlier about administration feeling like a lot of progress is being made on China with regards to fentanyl, that would be the original 20% that was done under APA that would go away. But that wouldn't necessarily, almost would not, impact the current 10% reciprocal that was also done under IEPA.
And then does the 10% IEPA go away then too? I'm still a little confused. I apologize.
Not because of anything to do with fentanyl. That's going to be the broader long-term negotiations between China and the US.
And when we say long term, we mean August
Yeah.
is when we'll know.
I have a question.
Because that's when the 90-day clock runs out, right, Megan?
Yes.
Megan, you were talking about the derivative, breaking out the steel and aluminum, and then also breaking out something else. You said there was a 3-month time period. What did you mean there?
Oh, I was joking, well, kind of not joking, is that because your products, well, at least the fishing reels, are subject or are under the derivative list, you have been supposed to be breaking your values out since those were implemented. Now the guys that have product classified under Chapter 73 or 76, now they have to break out their product. And I was just joking because I can only imagine the or the burden that you guys have had to go through to, yeah, it's unbelievable. I cannot imagine. And then I also can't imagine now how if you have those Chapter 73 products, of how many pages your customs entries are going to be. Actually, while we're on this call, Customs released a guidance saying we've updated our system to allow the use of more HTS codes on entry documents. So congratulations, Customs. They're ready for it.
Well, I took that to mean we had 3 months until we had to start breaking out the non-metal, but no, we'd have to do it right.
No, correct. Yeah, actually, yeah, it started on Wednesday if you have the products on 73 or 76. And I did reference this. If you don't have the capability or the documentation showing the breakout at this point, you can still file for just the FOB, or sorry, the entire value. But at this point, I don't know if that means then you're going to be subject, that entire value will be subject to the 50% and the IEPA tariffs, or if it's going to be 50% and not the IEPA. I don't know how that's going to work out yet.
And Megan, my understanding is what you're breaking out is the value of the aluminum.
That's correct.
So, I mean, even though a product may sell for $150, the value of aluminum may only be $15. I mean, is that, depending on how much is in it? Making sure I'm doing this right.
Yep, you're doing it right. I mean, the value is the way that our customs attorneys have explained to us of the value of what you want to, or how you're evaluating the value of the steel or the aluminum, is the price that you paid or that your supplier paid before they did anything to it. So it doesn't include any value add or any obviously labor or anything like that. It is just the price that your supplier paid. And that to me is terrifying because you got to get that from your supplier.
Well, my supplier doesn't want to give me that. What I've been doing is just going to the damn charts and seeing what steel or aluminum sold for. What's it selling for on that day per ounce? And that's what I'm using.
Interesting. I have not heard it done that way because, yeah. But and again, I'm not a customs attorney, so I don't know if that is okay or not. But we could
if you want to submit separate
Yeah.
question. Yeah, either talk offline with Megan, or we could be happy to put you in touch with our customs attorney, or relay the message and get you question and get you an answer.
Because my fear would be is say your supplier bought the steel in January, made it into whatever your product is in February, sent it over, but then you're using the May value of the steel. That could be very different. And customs, we have, despite all of the changes and a lot of the trade personnel having to take 6 weeks temporary stints at the border right now, we're hearing that they are enforcing much stricter right now and asking for CF-28s left and right, which for those of you who don't know, CF-28 is basically for you to provide all your documentation proving either that your product qualifies or that your valuation is correct or all that kind of stuff.
Megan, what do you know about the first sale doctrine, the first sale rule?
I know a little bit about it. Our outside attorneys know more about it, but I know the general practice, and I know it's very difficult, and that a lot of people are using it.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think on there you either need to talk to an attorney or like a KPMG or one of the accounting firms that do this. So it's you can get into trouble quickly. A lot more of our clients are using it. Small and medium sized companies. The big guys have all been using it. So there too. Mike, am I misremembering? Did we do a call?
Yeah, it
No.
was a couple of
We
months
did.
ago, but we did do a webinar on it.
So you might still have, did we record that? And
We did.
is that
Yep.
available? Yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to email me offline, we'll share you information on that and then connect you with Megan and Ron and yeah, get the customs expert involved to help with a lot of those specifics. Mike Dixon asked in the chat, jumping back to the China IEEPA tariffs, 30% plus your duty rate, question mark. Yes. Megan, what else?
For China, yes, but
Yeah.
not for.
And the 301 and the 301.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next one on the chat, and then Jeremy, I'll jump to you. Is it correct that the aluminum amount can either be the supplier value, their purchase price, or the slice of the costed BOM for the aluminum, including the overhead, etc., for the final finished good purchased from the supplier?
From my conversations with our attorneys, that it is the former. It is the price that the supplier paid, because that is what customs valuation practices provide.
That's my understanding too, but we probably
Yep.
better double check that. I don't want to get.
Well, we have
we're
it,
not.
Ron. We have it in writing from another client yesterday.
Oh, okay. All right. If you
Yep.
got in writing that, okay.
Yep. Actually,
Just wanna
so
be
I
explicit.
can.
We have it in writing from our attorney, you're saying?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Then I'm
So
comfortable.
actually, and so word for word or verbatim is this is what it says is the value of the steel/aluminum content using the cost to acquire the steel or aluminum, but by the entity fabricating the finished article multiplied by a factor for the quantity of steel used. Actually, here, I'll put that in the chat since that was a lot of words.
Sorry, Jake asked just a clarifying question. Please explain 301. That's referring to the 301 steel and aluminum tariffs.
Well, no. 301 was on.
Oh, sorry.
most products, right?
232. Yeah, sorry.
That goes back to Trump one. The
First
tariffs
Trump.
imposed under Trump, the first Trump administration.
Yeah.
So it could be some of your products. I mean, most products are tariffed at either 25 or 7.5% under 301. There are some products that escaped the tariffs. If you have a question, well, your broker should know that. But if you have any questions, send us your HTS numbers and we can tell you whether it's subject to a 301 tariff or not. But you would know it because those go back to 2019.
Yep. And they're only for Chinese goods. But that's actually a really good distinction. There are other 301 cases that USTR is currently investigating that they could add additional tariffs. Like, for example, there is a 301 maritime case that's starting in September. Ship or foreign flagged vessels are going to have to pay an additional fee every time they land at a U.S. port. So the word 301 is the provision of law that the case was administered under. But we mostly refer to it as 301 tariffs for China.
Jeremy, you want to unmute, ask your question?
Sure. I was just gonna ask, you guys were talking about Vietnam having a good deal. I don't know if you can expand on that a little bit. Does that mean like no more reciprocal tariffs? Do you guys think that means like a small tariff? Like, what does a good deal seem like to you?
Yeah, and again, I apologize. I probably took, gave a shorthand version. When I meant a good deal from the U.S. perspective, right? Meaning that Vietnam's giving the U.S. everything they want that should accommodate the U.S. That means that for most products should not have higher than a 10%. The president is going to try to keep in, and Megan, I'm going to turn over to you on that other new development we talked about. But clearly, the administration has indicated they're willing to go to zero on some products. They've used, for example, um, bananas, things that clearly not grown in the U.S. So, but what we expect with most deals is it's 10% for the vast majority of products, and going to zero maybe on a select few items, depending on how robust the commitments are from the other side, meaning buying commitments. Now we have picked up, and again, I only put this yet in the rumor stage. It's from a supplier in Vietnam that believes that there's going to be a layered approach on tariffs based on, well, Megan, why don't you take it over from there?
So what we've heard, and I can barely read my notes because I haven't actually seen the original email, but is that because, and Ron mentioned this earlier, is that there's such a concern of using Chinese raw materials, and it's actually then from a rule of origin perspective should have the label made in China versus made in Vietnam, that there will be, I guess, staged tariff levels of if you have
Tiered, probably, right, Megan?
tiered, yes,
Tiered.
thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have if you have more than 50% content of more than 50% Chinese content in your product, the tariff could be anywhere from 18 to 22%. If it's less than 50% content, then it's going to be 15 to 18%. And then if it is actually grown, or the product of Vietnam, i.e., a banana grown in Vietnam, then it would be the 10%. That's why we're putting it in the rumor stage, because those are higher than what we had previously heard. And then also, we don't know, or at least I don't know, and I haven't talked to anyone to figure out if there's any real legal ability to change how you're valuing or how you're figuring out your country of origin, because that's a systematic or harmonized across the world, the rules are. So again, it's in the rumor stage. We don't know. But it does show, and I think there was an article earlier this week about how the U.S. has asked Vietnam and others to be less dependent on China for the raw materials. But as many of you probably know, most of the raw materials do come from China, and so that's going to take some time you can't just build source raw materials from a country that doesn't make it. So I don't know how that's going to play out. I know that it is concerning. I heard this less than 24 hours ago, and alarm bells went off in my head, but I don't want to give too much thought to it, because it could just be another rumor.
Yeah, well, it
Yeah,
jives.
and I don't that gives
Sorry.
you less clarity than more, but
Yeah.
so I tend to think it's probably not true. But again, I've never heard that from any U.S. government source. So
And it
Well,
also makes the administrative burden even worse for you. And that's, I mean,
well, it jives with what's going on they have already implemented a really good system for knowing all this stuff. And my suppliers are already telling us about how they have to do all this crazy paperwork and all this stuff.
Hmm.
So it
Yep.
jives with that. So it does make sense that they're tracking
Yep.
it for a reason.
Yeah, because
And
what
that's
you're referring to is Vietnam created a new office for certifying origin. And that's actually what the US really likes because it's preventing, in their opinion, the transshipment. Because one of the things, and Mike alluded to this earlier, is with the end of de minimis, there's a huge fear that you're just going to change the label to made in Vietnam, made in Cambodia, or whatever, and ship it. And so without that certification, then the US won't be able to certify that, wait, this is actually true. But I don't want to go down that road until we actually know, because that's a really bad, scary thing for Friday afternoon.
So jumping back up in the chat, Joe asked, so if I am importing a spinning reel from China, injection mold body and aluminum spool, is there a ballpark tariff percent that I can use for projecting some sort of LDP price while we wait for more clarification?
You need to know the HDS.
Yeah, and also clarification on what, because I mean the 50% is going to be on the aluminum spool, and then 10% is going to be on the molded body.
Okay, I guess I'll go with that. I've just got to project out. I don't know, what percent. Okay, so you got a spinning reel. Three
Mhm.
quarters of the reel is the body, right? One quarter of the reel is the spool, right?
Mhm.
But I don't know what percent of steel and aluminum is in the guts,
I
right?
see it. Yeah, so that's where I unfortunately can't help, because I have not actually had the conversations that I'm assuming others on this call or in the industry have with their suppliers. I mean, I know you have to use your bill of materials, and it's an administrative nightmare. Um, and I don't know, Mike, if it's possible, and I'm just brainstorming, is whether or not we could take a, anonymous survey and to figure out how people have achieved this. And so maybe that's a way to do it, to give some feedback on that. I just don't know specifically, because that's obviously not, or what is the word? Uh, Gosh, you can tell I'm tired. Confidential information of how folks are actually doing it.
Okay, so most importers they're relying on the manufacturer to do a deep dive, figure out what percent to total each component is, and then using that to break it out, huh?
I wouldn't say relying on, because it depends on your I mean, some people are more hands-on with what you're making. So if you've designed the product and you have the bill of materials and you know exactly what's going in, then you're talking to them about the value. But if you're just, a third tier just buying it, that's very different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sorry I can't be more of help there. But Mike and I will talk offline to see if there's anything we can do to, take a snapshot, a confidential snapshot, and get some information back.
Okay, another one in the chat from Zach. A huge intent of the tariffs, from my understanding, is to try to drive manufacturing back to the US, or at least get 50% plus of the value added done in the US soil. Have you all heard of any programs that would couple the tariffs that would assist with companies looking to do that? That's a great question, and
That
something
is
you
a
think that is
that's
fantastic question.
yeah.
something you
But before
think
what
would
what I'd
be.
say is you got to look at the tariff, right? So Section 232 tariffs, the national security tariffs, the steel, those are for certain motivated by bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. That's where the president wants manufacturing back in the U.S. The IEEPA tariffs, even though you sometimes hear a comment, why don't you just make it in the U.S.? Those are for negotiating purposes. And you might have seen a comment that the president made about 2 weeks ago to the press, saying, I know we're not going to bring T-shirts and footwear back to the U.S. And when we met with this high-level political level person at USTR, they said the same thing to us, not specific to T-shirts and to um, shoes, but just we recognize everything can't come back to the U.S. So, that's why we got to keep active. That's why Mike's on the Hill all the time. That's why we're all talking to folks in the administration to articulate where that's not going to be possible in this industry. So it depends on the tariff whether the motivation is to bring back. Now, to the bottom line question is, there's increasing interest in Congress to try to provide incentives or reasons why for people to be able to reshore, right? Either through the tax code and other things. So there was something called the Americas Act, which Senators Cassidy from Louisiana and Bennett from Colorado introduced last year. They're working on a new version of that. That whole bill is intended on rewarding people that reshore or nearshore to a friendly country. So it provided large tax breaks, grants in some cases. If you reshore, it provided lower tax breaks, but still tax breaks, and sometimes grants if you friendshore, go to Mexico or some other countries. So that's something that we just need to keep pounding away at. And I think Congress will want to look at that. Once we get beyond the big beautiful bill and the reciprocal tariff negotiations, then Congress is gonna need to look at that. Megan, I can't remember. I don't think there's anything in the reconciliation bill that passed.
There's one tax incentive, which again, I don't like commenting on it yet because we don't know what the Senate's going to do. But in the House version, there is a tax provision that has been proposed. And don't quote me on this because I'm not a tax person, and that's tax and trade are very different, let me tell you. But I believe it's 100% expensing, and I don't remember for how long, for any new infrastructure built for business use and manufacturing. But that's just infrastructure, and it's not nearly as robust as folks would need because, as you know, you would probably need to import your tooling and import all that kind of stuff or remake the tooling. There's also another program called the Foreign Trade Zone Program, which was created to help all this. But unfortunately, as of right now, the administration has treated the way that you can invert a tariff, and the administration is not allowing them to do that right now. But if we're able to get to the right people, knock on wood, hopefully, to help them understand that this is a tool that they already have in their toolbox to help bring back more manufacturing, then that could be an option. And Mike, I knew you're going to ask this question, and I don't have good news for you on GSP renewal. Or not GSP renewal, yes, but I don't have good news for you on Thailand. And actually,
Megan,
I was going to let you have that one.
Let me take that one to clarify. Number one, when I said friendshoring in the context of the Americas Act, that was Western Hemisphere friendshoring. So that's separate. Next, yes, I mean, the president recognizes there are countries that we want friendshoring. So, for example, in the Philippines, we believe that will pivot quickly to a full-fledged free trade agreement sometime in the fall. That we will then be on the road to getting zero tariffs on everything if they can pull off that negotiation. Thailand, the bad news Megan was going to say was that the U.S. broke off negotiations with Thailand a few weeks ago because when the U.S. raised the concern about Chinese goods being transshipped through Thailand, the Thai government said that's not happening. We don't need to do anything. And then the U.S. said, fine, we have nothing else to talk about. I have not heard anything whether or not they've resumed those negotiations. We're trying to find that out, and we'll let you know. But right now, what I've been telling people is that's one country that is risking going up after July 9th back up to the originally announced reciprocal tariffs, which what 40 something, 44% or something. Do you remember, Megan, with Thailand?
No, something along that. The other factor there, and Mike, actually, you and I haven't talked about this, is we are hearing, and again, also in the rumor stage, but in the more likely to be true stage, is that Senate Republicans Finance Committee are working to get GSP renewal and AGOA renewal on reconciliation. It remains to be seen if it's going to happen. I haven't talked to any Democrats yet because I don't want to blow their cover if they don't know. Regardless, that would be great news. But because of with Thailand specifically, if you recall 2 years ago or whenever GSP was last in place, the administration had removed certain product eligibility. So they were already kind of in this middle zone. And now that they're, not getting along even more or better, that does not bode well for future GSP eligibility. If and when GSP is renewed, I am still confident it's going to happen. I just don't know when. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, Mike.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No
But I am
bottom
watching
fishing
for you.
closure in the South Atlantic, Mike, if that makes you feel better. So Jake asked, how do we navigate products coming from China that the value of the product is more than 30% US products? And I think this is getting to, well, Megan, I'll just let you take it from there.
More than 30%.
I'm not sure
You mean
30%. Yeah, there is a threshold
the
at
value.
which
That was 20%.
20%. Okay.
That would mean that the whatever percent US content you have would be tariffed with the 20% fentanyl and then the 10% IEPA on just the non-US content for those.
Any
Actually,
product that has is at least 20%.
The 20% actually I think applies to all the FOB because I don't think there's a breakout for fentanyl. It's just the IEPA ones. The IEPA reciprocal ones.
So any product that has at least 20% US containing products in it, you take out the US products for calculating the remaining tariffs, right?
Correct. But that's also a nice another technical caveat that if your aluminum was die casted or extruded in the United States, then you would not have to pay the 50%.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any aluminum in my products.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But that's another point. So, and again, going back to the 3-month stuff, you guys have already been doing this, but you will still have to provide the primary country and the secondary country of die casting and smelt for steel and aluminum. But if for some reason you are able to get a US casted steel, which I don't think is possible, or extruded, then you would be exempt from the 50%.
Clear as mud. More questions either in the chat or anyone want to ask one off of mute? We're approaching an hour. Maybe everybody's tapped out.
Do you think there'll be any extensions on the July 9th date, or do you think they'll get it all figured out by then?
And I'll let Ron interrupt me, but I think for the big countries, it will be settled, but for smaller countries, there'll be extensions.
Okay.
Because can you imagine negotiating with 70 countries in a 90-day time period?
Yeah, the only caveat to that is there'll be extensions for countries the U.S. believes are productively negotiating or willing to negotiate with the U.S.
Right.
So if the U.S. does, like Thailand was the example we used earlier, if that situation continues and negotiations don't resume, then I don't think there'll be an extension. So we're going to work really hard to get you an answer on Thailand soon to see if negotiations have resumed. I haven't heard anything in the last 2 weeks. So hopefully the Thai governments come to their senses. And again, we've said this before. We encourage you like to go to your supplier in Thailand and tell them, please talk to your government, tell them, to re-engage with the US. We got to avoid these higher tariffs.
So my next question would be, how likely is it that the tariffs change again after all this gets settled? So like, can we sleep at night, or is it gonna change in 2 more months?
I think the White House has gotten the message there needs to be some certainty, right? That's the big thing that Congress has, Republicans are not publicly criticizing the tariffs or the president on the tariffs, but they privately are really delivering the message that you're putting in jeopardy our majority in the Senate, our majority in the House. You're really playing with fire, not giving the business community certainty. So I think they know they need to get to there. So, with the caveat, you always have to issue under a President Trump, which is anything can happen. My guess is that we're going to get to the point in the fall when we're going to have, we know where things are, and not likely to change for the
I hope
worse.
so.
Because I can see some of the trade deals like with Vietnam, where if they come out and they say, okay, you get zero on some products, but most products are 10%. And then once the US verifies that Vietnam's living up to those commitments and maybe willing to do more, then I could see that situation getting better.
Oh, good.
One other technical thing that I'll leave you with, and just because I've been getting a lot of questions about this, is for the 90-day pause on July 9th, in order to guarantee that your product is subject only to the 10%, it needs to have physically arrived here, and it also needs to have gone through customs. So you could not be on the boat and say, pre-file or pre-enter your or the entry, which you can do, obviously. It has to actually have arrived by 12:01 July 9th. So I would say July 8th for that. And then the same thing for the China pause, which we don't actually, customs hasn't released the date. That's August 12th. That's just my calculation of a 90-day and everyone else's calculation, but I'm assuming we're assuming that they have not released the final date yet because they haven't been given direction from the White House and they presume it will change. But again, the only point is there's not an in-transit clause. It has to have arrived and have entered customs. So use air freight at this point. And I know that's really expensive, but.
All right. Anything else? Well, Ron, Megan, thanks a ton for all the insights. I know I certainly appreciate it. I feel like I can speak for everyone else that we do too, both the things that we are certain about, but as well as just you all's conversations that you have, the expertise you have, at least just sharing what you think may happen, what you're hearing. I know it's not always stuff that people can go to the bank with, but it's I think really helpful just for anyone to get sort of any insights as to what some of these conversations are on and off the Hill is really helpful. So everyone, feel free to reach out to me, Leonard at asafishing.org for any follow-up questions. If you want to get back in touch with Ron, Megan, or others at their firm, I know they'll be happy to do it. And we'll continue to follow up as things evolve, devolve, change, and do our best to make sure you guys have all the information you need to make the best decisions you can. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and everybody try and have a great weekend, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.